Hello, and welcome to the Final Fantasy XIV Machinist Guide. In this guide, I'll be covering the basics of the Machinist rotation and utility at level 90. Machinist, alongside Bard and Dancer, is one of the 3 physical range jobs. Out of these 3, Machinist is considered the selfish DPS, whereas both Bard and Dancer's playstyle revolves around buffing your party members through dances and songs. Machinist, on the other hand, has no buffs and focuses solely on providing high burst damage to make the most out of your party members' buffs. The Machinist job gauge consists of 2 bars, a red one for heat and a blue one for battery. It is important to not overcap these gauges by using your heat and battery generating abilities whilst these gauges are full. Since the Machinist has a static rotation, this is less of a concern than you might initially think. Heat is generated using your main combo abilities, Scattergun and Barrel Stabilizer. It is spent on Hypercharge, overheating your Ether Pack, which buffs your single target GCD abilities by 20 potency and allows the usage of the Heat Blast ability. Battery is generated by your final combo ability Clean Shot, Air Anchor and Chainsaw. It is spent on summoning the Automaton Queen, a mean robot with an attitude that does a considerable amount of burst damage. The main rotation is fairly simple. You want to keep your tool abilities, Drill, Air Anchor and Chainsaw, always on cooldown. These 3 abilities hit very hard, and letting them sit idle for an extended time could result in a misusage over the course of a fight and might drift them outside of your party trait buffs. 2 more important abilities to not let sit idle are Gauss Round and Ricochet. These 2 OGCD abilities have a short cooldown and can stack up 3 times. Simply use these as you get them to keep the stacks low and not to overcap. Alongside these tools, you have 5 more major cooldowns to keep track of. The first is Barrel Stabilizer. This OGCD grants you 50 heat and allows you to instantly go into your burst phase. Use this as shown in the opener later in the guide and keep it on cooldown as long as you do not overcap your heat gauge. The second major cooldown is Wildfire. This OGCD applies a debuff to a target which explodes after 10 seconds. The damage of this explosion scales with the amount of GCD abilities you hit the target with during its duration. This means it's important to get the full amount of GCD abilities into the debuff before it expires. The correct way to do this leads us onto our third major cooldown. Hypercharge. Spending your heat gauge, this ability puts you into overheat, increasing your single target damage and enabling the Heat Blast ability. During the usage of Hypercharge, you will gain 5 charges of Hypercharge. Each can be spent on 1 Heat Blast. Heat Blast will decrease the cooldown of both Gauss Round and Ricochet by 15 seconds. This means that in between your Heat Blasts you will be required to weave in one of the 2 OGCDs to prevent them from overcapping. Do keep in mind that Heat Blast has a 1.5 second GCD, so it is only possible to weave in one of these 2 per cast. Next up, we have the ability Reassemble. This neat OGCD makes your next GCD ability a guaranteed critical strike. Use this on either Drill, Air Anchor or Chainsaw. It's also important to try use one of them during the 2-minute burst windows. Lastly, we have the Automaton Queen. Spending your battery gauge, you summon a robot that dashes in and auto-attacks the target for a set duration, leading into 2 finishing moves that deal a considerable amount of damage. It is important to note that her damage scales linearly with battery usage. That said, it is important to summon higher battery queens that use their finisher moves in the rate buffs of your party members, as this allows you to dump more potency into set rate buffs. When all of your cooldowns are used and we have nothing else to do, we have a 3-part combo that generates heat and battery gauge. This 3-part combo starts with Heated Split Shot and goes into Heated Slug Shot, and then ends with Heated Clean Shot. Make sure to keep your GCD rolling by using your combo to fill out your rotation. The rotation of the Machinist job is static. This means that every pull, the rotation is the exact same. There's no procs or RNG that changes anything. This makes it both very easy and difficult at the same time, depending on what you're good at. Since the rotation is static, you can learn the exact order of abilities and simply press that to perform perfectly every single pull. This also means there is no room for error, and letting your cooldowns sit unused or spending your gauges at the wrong time can have serious impact on how much damage you do. There are 4 things we need to talk about to play our rotation perfectly. The first thing is your opener, which there are 2 main versions of. The standard opener goes as follows. 5 seconds prior to pulling, use reassemble. 2 seconds prior to pulling, drink your tincture. Start with air anchor and weave in Gauss round and ricochet. Use drill and weave in barrel stabilizer. Start your heated combo. Use heated split shot and heated slug shot. Weave in both Gauss round and ricochet before using heated clean shot. Weave in reassemble and wildfire after clean shot before using chainsaw. Then weave in automaton queen and hypercharge before bursting with heat blast. Use heat blast 5 times before finishing off the opener with a drill. In between each heat blast, weave in a ricochet or a Gauss round to prevent overcapping. Here's an example of the opener being done. Following this opener, your 2-minute burst will look like this. After you use your air anchor on cooldown, weave in both Gauss round and ricochet. Then use drill and weave in automaton queen and hypercharge. Use 5 heat blasts. After the first heat blast, weave in barrel stabilizer, and after the last, weave in reassemble. On all the other heat blasts, weave in Gauss round or ricochet. After the last heat blast, use chainsaw and weave in wildfire first and another hypercharge second. Use another 5 heat blast, weaving in ricochet or Gauss round in between each and finishing off with a drill. Here's an example of that burst being done. The alternative and preferred opener is called the delayed tools opener. Start off by drinking your tincture 2 seconds before the pull. Then open with your heated split shot, weave in Gauss round and ricochet before using drill. Weave in barrel stabilizer and use your heated slug shot. Weave in another ricochet and use heated clean shot. Weave in reassemble and Gauss round and then use your air anchor and weave in another reassemble and wildfire. Use your chainsaw, summon your queen and use hypercharge before using 5 heat blast and ending on drill. In between each heat blast, try to weave in a ricochet or a Gauss round to prevent overcapping. Here's an example of that opener being done. Following this opener, your 2-minute burst window will look like this. Using drill on cooldown, weave in barrel stabilizer and then go into 2 heated combo GCDs. Summon your queen on the second of these combo GCDs and use air anchor. Weave in reassemble and wildfire and then use chainsaw. After the chainsaw, weave in hypercharge and use 5 heat blasts. Weave in ricochet or Gauss round in between each. Use your drill on cooldown and weave in a hypercharge afterwards. Use 5 more heat blasts with a Gauss round and a ricochet weave in between each, before finishing your burst. Here's an example of that burst being done. The opener and the 2-minute burst sequences are arguably the most difficult parts of the job. My recommendation is to master the opener on a dummy before continuing into further parts of the rotation. The Machinist opener is also very flexible, and the 3 combo GCDs, drill, chainsaw and air anchor, and also your wildfire plus hypercharge burst can be moved around. This usually is only done if you know the specific encounter time of the boss you're about to fight, and then only if it means you gain an extra usage out of any of these abilities. If you do not know these things for certain, then stick to the standard openers which I just described. Lastly, I'll talk a little bit more in depth on your Automolon Queen. As previously mentioned, you use your Queen instantly at 50 battery gauge in your opener. After this, her usage will change depending on what opener you used. For the standard opener, use her at 70 battery after the odd minute chainsaw. Subsequent odd minute Queens can be used at either 80 or 90 battery to prepare for the even minute burst. For the delayed tools opener, you can use her at 50 battery and then at 80 or 90 on subsequent odd minutes. If Queen is summoned and the boss is about to become untargetable or is about to die, then you can use Queen Overdrive. Queen Overdrive instantly lets your Queen do her finishers. Only ever use this if the target is about to become untargetable or if they are about to die. In any other scenario, just let Queen do her thing. She will automatically use Pile Bunker and Ground Collider. During AoE encounters like dungeons, we adjust our rotation. Start using your reassemble on chainsaw with any second reassembles on air anchor. Use Bioblaster instead of drill. On 2 targets, you still want to use Heat Blast during your hypercharge windows and still do your single target combo as filler. On 3 targets or more, you can start using your auto crossbow instead of your Heat Blast and filler with Flamethrower and Scattergun. Starting at 7 targets or more, you can stop using air anchor altogether. Whilst Machinist is a salvage DPS, it does bring some very good utility. Tactician is a 90-second cooldown which applies a 15-second buff, reducing all damage taken by 10%. Since you do not have to target any enemy to apply this mitigation, and since the duration is considerably longer than Addle and Feint, this makes Tactician one of the stronger damage mitigations a DPS can bring. It is worth to note that both Bard and Dancer have their own versions of Tactician. They are named Troubadour and Shield Samba. These 2 abilities are functionally the same as Tactician. This means that Machinists do not have an edge over these 2 jobs in terms of utility. These 3 abilities also do not stack, instead they override each other. Keep this in mind when playing in a party with another physical ranged. The second ability Machinist gains is Dismantle. This ability reduces the target's damage done by 10% for 10 seconds. An extremely powerful mitigation ability. Try to use this to mitigate as much damage as possible, in coordination with your healers. Alongside Tactician, we have access to the standard physical range job actions. These include Leg Race, a 40% slow that lasts for 10 seconds. Second Wind, a potent self-heal with a long cooldown. Use this when caught in a dire situation. Foot Grace, a 10-second long route that disappears when the target takes damage. Peloton, a rate-wide buff that increases everyone's movement speed. This buff does not work in combat. Use this before the pull to help your melees get to the boss faster and in between dungeon pulls. At Grace, an interrupt that has a short cooldown. At Arm's Length, this is your knockback immunity. A special thanks to Duke Prime for recording the opener and even minute burst examples, and the rest of the Machinist balance staff for fact checking the contents of this video.